Good morning, everyone! Have you ever heard about the external environment of a firm? Now let's find out how challenging and complex the external environment is. I am Yasko Hazel.
And I am Salma San Florence Ann.
We are the reporters for this chapter.
So fasten your seatbelt and let's start.
Studying this chapter should provide you with the strategic management knowledge needed to explain the importance of analyzing and understanding the firm's external environment, together with definition and descriptions of the general environment and the industry environment, as well as the discussion of the 4 parts of the external environment analysis process, and to name and describe the general environment's 7 segments and the identifications of the 5 competitive forces and explain how they determine an industry's profitability potential. Also, to define the strategic groups and describe their influence on firms, and lastly, to describe what firms need to know about their competitors and different methods, including ethical standards, used to collect intelligence about them. A firm's external environment is challenging and complex because of its effect on performance, that the firm must develop its skills required to identify opportunities and threats that are parts of its external environment. The external environment has 3 major parts. These are the general environment, industry environment, and the competitor environment. A firm's strategic actions are influenced by the condition in all of these 3 parts. Now, let's take a look at this figure of external environment where all major parts involved in it shows the relation and connection between them. General environment is composed of dimensions in the broader society that influence an industry and the firms within it. These dimensions are grouped into 7 environmental segments, namely economic, political or legal, socio-cultural, technological, global, and sustainable physical. Since firms cannot directly control the general environment's segments, they must study various anticipated trends as a foundation for predicting its effects on their ability to identify strategies to use that will allow them to remain successful as market conditions change. Now, the threats of new entrants, the power of suppliers, the power of buyers, the threat of product substitutes, and the intensity of rivalry among competing firms are what directly influences a firm and its competitive actions and responses. Interactions among these 5 forces determine an industry's profitability potential. Then the challenge for a firm is to locate a position within an industry where it can favorably influence the 5 factors or where it can successfully defend itself against their influences. Ideally, the greater a firm's capacity to favorably influence its industry environment, the greater the likelihood it will earn above average returns. Now, understanding the firm's competitor environment complements the insights provided by the studying the general and industry environment. Gathering and interpreting information about their competitors is called competitor analysis under competitor environment. Now, the importance of analyzing and understanding the firm's external environment is that it will lead to the firm's development and implementation to a more effective strategy, especially when it effectively integrates the insights provided by analysis of the general, industry, and the competitor environment. Knowing that, of course, a combination of the result among these 3 analyses influence the firm's vision, mission, choice of strategies, and the competitive actions and responses that it will take to implement those strategies. Now, the important definition among those 3 environments involved is that general environment, of course, is the dimensions in the broader society that influence an industry and the firms within it, while the industry environment is a set of factors that directly influences a firm and its competitive actions and response, while the competitor environment focuses on each company against which a firm directly competes. Now, as the general environment focuses on environmental trends and their implications, and analysis of the industry environment focuses on the factors and conditions influencing an industry's profitability potential, and an analysis of competitors which focus on predicting competitors' actions, responses, and intentions. A firm can smoothly handle and have all the cover in the aspects of external environment because of general environment as the foundations and dimensions, divisions to what we're talking. Industry environment focuses on the factors of influence, and the competitor is for the gathering and interpreting, which will lead to an analysis to a better effectivity and efficiency of the firm's external environment. Well, identifying opportunities and threats is an important objective of studying the general environment. For an opportunity is a condition in the general environment that if exploited helps a company achieve strategic competitiveness, while a threat is a condition in the general environment that may hinder a company's efforts to achieve strategic competitiveness. Most firms face external environments that are turbulent, complex, and global in all of our conditions that make interpreting those environments difficult. Now, to cope up with often ambiguous and incomplete environmental data and to increase understanding of the general environment, firms complete an external environmental analysis. And this analysis has 4 parts. We have scanning, monitoring, forecasting, and assessing. For scanning is identifying early signals of environmental changes and trends, while monitoring is to detecting meaning through ongoing observations of environmental changes and trends, and forecasting is for developing projections of anticipated outcomes based on monitored changes and trends. Well, lastly, the assessing, which is for determining the timing and importance of environmental changes and trends to firms' strategies and their management. Now we have scanning, which entails the study of all segments in the general environment. This is where firms kay makadetect or maka-identify sa mga potential changes by means of signals sa general environment or mga changes nga naa. Now, through scanning, makita na to ang mga unconnected or mga incomplete data and information. Then the challenges and the critical part of the firm arises, especially sa mga highly volatile environment. Scanning could be of any medium, and special software is a go-to as well. Also, internet provides significant opportunities for it. After scanning the relevant and essential details affecting the firm, a monitoring is done to have a meaningful observation among the changes happened in the first part. This is where important trends are sorted in accordance to the emerging changes in the environment. The effectivity of monitoring ensures the identifications of the importance among stakeholders in understanding its reputations as a foundation for serving their unique needs. Well, in particular, scanning and monitoring are important when an industry competes with a high technological uncertainty. We have scanning and monitoring concerned with events and trends in the general environment at a point in time. As for forecasting, it is the development of feasible projections of what might happen and how quickly as a result of the changes and trends detected through scanning and monitoring, both of which focus on events at a point in time. What's more challenging about the demand for forecasting is the continually driving products life cycle shortly in technology trends. That's it. Assessing for the last components of external environmental analysis, where there is the specifications to the implications of the understanding gathered in the previous stages. Hence, interpretation here is the key. Even if formal assessment is inadequate, the appropriate interpretations of that information is important. For gathering and organizing information is important, but appropriately interpreting that intelligence to determine if an identified trend in the external environment is an opportunity or threat is paramount. The general environment is composed of segments that are external to the firm. Although the degree of impact varies, these environmental segments affect all industries and the firms competing in them. Now the challenge to each firm is to scan, monitor, forecast, and assess the elements in each segment to predict their effects on it. Effective scanning, monitoring, forecasting, and assessing are vital to the firm's efforts to recognize and evaluate opportunities and threats. Now, demographic segments are commonly analyzed on a global basis because of their potential effects across countries, borders, and because many firms compete in global market. And it is concerned with the population size, age structure, geographic distribution, ethnic mix, and income distribution. By means of population size, it is to assess their strategic implications. And as for age structure, this is the most noteworthy aspect of this element of the demographic segment because it is that the world's population is rapidly aging. Well, for the geographic distribution, this is how a population is distributed within countries and regions that is subject to changes over time. Well, for ethnic mix, of countries' populations continually to change, creating opportunities and threats for many companies as a result. Now, for income distribution, it is to understand how income is distributed within and across populations informs firms of different groups' purchasing power and distributionary income. Now, we also have the economic segment where it refers to the nature and the direction of the economy and which a firm competes or may compete. Firms generally seek to compete in relatively stable economies with strong growth potential. With globalizations and the interconnectedness of nations, firms must scan, monitor, forecast, and assess the health of their host nations and the health of the economies outside their host nations. To also consider the economic segments factors like inflation rates, interest rates, trade deficits of surpluses, budget deficits of surpluses, personal savings rate, business savings rates, as well as the gross domestic product. Political or legal segment is the arena in which organizations and interest groups compete for attention, resources, and a voice in overseeing the body of laws and regulations guiding interactions among nations, as well as between firms and various local governmental agencies. Well, commonly, firms develop a political strategy to specify how they will study the political or legal segment as well as approaches they might take, such as lobbying efforts, in order to successfully deal with opportunities and threats that surface within the segment at different points in time. It is where that segment represents how organizations and governments mutually try to influence each other and how firms try to understand these influences, current and projected, on their strategic actions. They might also consider and covers the political or legal factors like antitrust laws, taxation laws, deregulations philosophies, labor training laws in educational philosophies and policies. As for the social cultural segment, this is concerned with the society's attitudes and cultural values because attitudes and values form the cornerstones of a society, that they often drive the demographic, economic, political, or legal and technological conditions and changes. Individuals, societies, attitudes, and cultural orientations are anything but stable, meaning that firms must carefully scan, monitor, forecast, and assess them to recognize and study associated opportunities and threats. Successful firms must have an awareness of changes taking place in a society as their associated cultures in which they are competing. Well, indeed, societal and cultural changes challenge firms to find ways to adapt to stay ahead of their competitors and stay relevant in the minds of their customers. For the social cultural segment is concerned with the society's attitudes and cultural values is the coverage there. But for some factors, we have the women in the workforce as well as the consideration of diversity attitudes about the quality of work life and shifts in works and the career preferences as well as in shifts in products and service preferences characteristics. Now, talking about the technological segment, which changes occurs through new products, processes, and materials. The technological segment includes the activities involved in creating new knowledge and translating that knowledge into new outputs, products, processes, and materials. Given the rapid pace of technological change and risk of disruptions, it is vital for firms to study this segment, considering the factors of product innovations, new communication technologies, applications of knowledge, and the focus of private and the government-supported R&D expenditures. Now for the global segment, markets and consumers are more global here. This segment includes relevant new global markets, existing markets that are changing, important international political events, and critical cultural and institutional characteristics of global markets. So when studying the global segment, firms should recognize that globalizations of business markets may create opportunities to enter new markets as well as threats that new competitors from other economies may also enter their market. That is to say, to consider the important political events, critical global markets, and the newly industrialized countries, together with the different cultures and institutional attributes, is the factor that we need to cover and consider as well. Lastly, for the sustainable physical environment segment, which is concerned with trends oriented to sustaining the world's physical environment, firms recognize that ecological, social, and economic systems interactively influence what happens in this particular segment. This segment refers to the potential and actual changes in the physical environment and business practices that are intended to positively respond to and deal with those changes. That is why to consider the energy consumption, practices used to develop energy sources, renewable energy efforts, minimizing a firm's environmental footprint, and the availability of water as resources, producing environmentally friendly products, and reacting to natural or man-made disasters is what they aim for. Now, an industry environmental analysis where industry is a group of firms producing products that are close substitutes. In the course of competition, these firms influence one another. Typically, companies use a rich mix of different competitive strategies to pursue above-average returns when competing in a particular industry. An industry's structural characteristics influence a firm's choice of strategies. Compared with the general environment, the industry environment has a more direct effect on the firm's strategic competitiveness and the ability to earn above-average returns. That is to say that to study an industry, the firm examines 5 forces that affect the ability of all firms to operate profitably within a given industry. That the 5 forces are the threats posed by new entrants, the power of suppliers, the power of buyers, product substitutes, and the intensity of rivalry among competitors. As mentioned earlier, the 5 forces of competition models expands the arena of competitive analysis. Historically, firms concentrated only on direct competitors. Today, firms must study many industries as competitors are defined more broadly. For example, the communications industry now encompasses media companies, telecoms, entertainment companies, and smartphone producers. So when studying the industry environment, firms must also recognize that suppliers can become a firm's competitor by integrating forward, as can buyers by integrating backward. For example, Several firms have integrated forward in the pharmaceutical industry by acquiring distributors or wholesalers. In addition, firms choosing to enter a new market and those producing products that are adequate substitutes for existing products can become a company's competitors. Well, next, we can examine the 5 forces the firms need to analyze in order to understand the profitability potential within an industry or a segment of an industry in which it competes or may choose to compete. Now, this figure shows the 5 forces of competition model, where threats of new entrants, bargaining power of suppliers, bargaining power of buyers, threat of substitute products, and the rivalry among competing firms are interrelated.
Now we will discuss about the 5 forces of competition model. So first, we have threat of new entrants. So identifying new entrants is important because they can threaten the market share of existing competitors. One reason new entrants pose such a threat is that they bring additional production capacity. Unless the demand for goods or service is increasing, additional capacity holds consumers' costs down, resulting in less revenue and lower returns for competing firms. Often, new entrants have a keen interest in gaining a large market share. As a result, new competitors may force existing firms to be more efficient and to learn how to compete in new dimensions. Entry barriers make it difficult for new firms to enter an industry and often place them at a competitive disadvantage even when they are able to enter. As such, high entry barriers tend to increase the returns for existing firms in the industry and may allow some firms to dominate the industry. Thus, firms competing successfully in an industry want to maintain high entry barriers in order to discourage potential competitors from deciding to enter the industry. The likelihood that firms will enter an industry is a function of 2 factors: barriers to entry and the retaliation expected from current industry participants. There are different kinds of barriers to entering a market to consider when examining an industry environment. Companies competing within a particular industry study these barriers to determine the degree to which their competitive position reduces the likelihood of new competitors being able to enter the industry to compete against them. So these are the several significant entry barriers that may discourage competitors from entering a market and that may facilitate a firm's ability to remain competitive in a market in which it currently competes. These are the economies of scale, product differentiation, capital requirements, switching costs, access to distribution channels, cost disadvantages independent of scale, and government policy. Economies of scale are derived from incremental efficiency improvements through experience as a firm grows larger. Therefore, the cost of producing each unit declines as the quantity of a product produced during a given period increases. A new entrant is unlikely to quickly generate the level of demand for its product that in turn would allow it to develop economies of scale. Economies of scale can be developed in most business functions, such as marketing, manufacturing, research and development, and purchasing. Firms sometimes form strategies, alliances, or joint ventures to gain scale economies. So the factors or the advantages or disadvantages related to large and small scale entries are the flexibility in pricing and market share, cost related to scale economies, competitor retaliations, flexible manufacturing systems diminishes the effectiveness of economies of scale to act as a barrier. Next, we have product differentiation. Over time, customers may come to believe that a firm's product is unique. This belief can result from the firm's service to the customer, effective advertising campaigns, or being the first to market a good or service. Greater levels of perceived product uniqueness create consumers or customers who consistently purchase a firm's products. To combat the perceptions of uniqueness, new entrants frequently offer products at lower prices. This decision, however, may result in lower profits or even losses. Next, we have the capital requirements. Competing in a new industry requires a firm to have resources to invest. In addition to physical facilities, capital is needed for inventories, marketing activities, and other critical business functions. Even when a new industry is attractive, the capital required for successful market entry may not be able to pursue the market opportunity. Another one is switching cost. Switching costs are the one-time cost customers incur when they buy from a different supplier. The cost of buying new ancillary equipment and of retaining employees, and even the psychological cost of ending a relationship may be incurred in switching to a new supplier. If switching costs are high, a new entrant must offer either a substantially lower price or a much better product to attract buyers. Usually, the more established the relationships between parties, the greater the switching cost. We also have the access to distribution channels. Over time, industry participants commonly learn how to effectively distribute their products. Access to distribution channels can be a strong entry barrier for new entrants, particularly in consumer non-durable goods industries, like in the grocery stores where shelf space is limited, and in international markets. New entrants have to persuade distributors to carry their products either in addition to or in place of those currently distributed. Price breaks and cooperative advertising allowances may be used for this purpose. However, those practices reduce the new entrant's profit potential. Interestingly, access to distribution is less of a barrier for products that can be sold on the internet. Last two are cost disadvantages independent of scale and government policy. For the former, sometimes established competitors have cost advantages that new entrants cannot duplicate. Proprietary product technology, favorable access to raw materials, desirable locations, and government subsidies are examples. Successful competition requires new entrants to reduce the strategic relevance of these factors. Government policy. Through their decisions about issues such as the granting of licenses and permits, governments can also control entry into an industry. Also, governments often restrict entry into some industries because of the need to provide quality service or the desire to protect jobs. Alternatively, deregulating industries such as the airline and utilities industries in the United States generally results in additional firms choosing to enter and compete within an industry. Governmental decisions and policies regarding antitrust issues also affect entry barriers. For example, in the United States, the antitrust divisions of the Justice Department or the Federal Trade Commission will sometimes disallow a proposed merger because officials conclude that approving it would create a firm that is too dominant in an industry and would thus create unfair competition. Such a negative ruling would obviously be an entry barrier for an acquiring firm. Expected retaliation. Companies seeking to enter an industry also anticipate the reactions of firms in the industry. An expectation of swift and vigorous competitive responses reduces the likelihood of entry. Vigorous retaliation can be expected when the existing firm has a major stake in the industry. like that. It has fixed assets with few, if any, alternative uses. When it has substantial resources, and when industry growth is slow or constrained. For example, any firm attempting to enter the airline industry can expect significant retaliation from existing competitors due to overcapacity. Locating market niches not being served by incumbents allow the new entrants to avoid entry barriers. Small entrepreneurial firms are generally best suited for identifying and serving neglected market segments. When Honda first entered the US motorcycle market, it concentrated on small engine motorcycles, a market that firms such as Harley-Davidson ignored. By targeting this neglected niche, Honda initially avoided a significant amount of head-to-head competition with established competitors. After consolidating its position, Honda used its strength to attack rivals by introducing larger motorcycles and competing in the broader market. Another one of the 5 forces of competition model is the bargaining power of suppliers. Increasing prices and reducing the quality of their products are potential means suppliers use to exert power over firms competing within an industry. If a firm is unable to recover cost increases by its suppliers through its own pricing structure, its profitability is reduced by its suppliers' actions. A supplier group is powerful when it is dominated by a few large companies and is more concentrated than the industry to which it sells. Satisfactory substitute products are not available to industry firms. Industry firms are not a significant customer for the supplier group. Suppliers' goods are critical to buyers' marketplace success. The effectiveness of suppliers' products has created high switching costs for industry firms. It poses a credible threat to integrate forward into the buyer's industry. Credibility is enhanced when suppliers have substantial resources and provide a highly differentiated product. Bargaining power of buyers. Firms seek to maximize the return on their invested capital. Alternatively, buyers want to buy products at the lowest possible price, the point at which the industry earns the lowest acceptable rate of return on its invested capital. To reduce their cost, buyers bargain for higher quality, greater levels of service, and lower prices. These outcomes are achieved by encouraging competitive battles among the industry's firms. Customers are powerful when they purchase a large portion of an industry's total output. The sales of the product being purchased account for a significant portion of the seller's annual revenues. They could switch to another product at little, if any, cost. And last, the industry's products are undifferentiated or standardized, and the buyers pose a credible threat if they were to integrate backward into the seller's industry. Threat of substitute products. Substitute products are goods or services from outside a given industry that perform similar or the same functions as a product that the industry produces. For example, as a sugar substitute, NutraSweet places an upper limit on sugar manufacturers' prices. NutraSweet and sugar perform the same functions, though with different characteristics. Other product substitutes include email and fax machines instead of overnight deliveries, plastic containers rather than glass jars, and tea instead of coffee. In general, Product substitutes presents a strong threat to a firm when customers face few, if any, switching costs, and when the substitute product's price is lower or its quality and performance capabilities are equal to or greater than those of the competing product. Differentiating a product along dimensions that are valuable to customers, such as quality, service after the sale, and location, reduces a substitute's attractiveness. Functions of a substitute places a ceiling on prices firms can charge. Goods or services outside a given industry perform the same or similar functions at a competitive price. Lastly, we have the intensity of rivalry among competitors. Because an industry's firms are mutually dependent, actions taken by one company usually invite responses. Competitive rivalry intensifies when a firm is challenged by a competitor's actions or when a company recognizes an opportunity to improve its market position. Firms within industries are rarely homogeneous. They differ in resources and capabilities and seek to differentiate themselves from competitors. Typically, firms seek to differentiate their products from competitors' offerings in ways that customers value and in which the firms have a competitive advantage. Common dimensions on which rivalry is based include price, service after the sale, and innovation. More recently, firms have begun to act quickly in order to gain a competitive advantage. Here are the most prominent factors that experience shows affect the intensity of rivalries among firms. Numerous or equally balanced competitors, slow industry growth, high fixed cost or high storage costs, lack of differentiation opportunities or low switching costs, high strategic stakes, and high exit barriers. Exit barriers. High exit barriers prevent competitors from leaving the industry. Sometimes, companies continue competing in an industry even though the returns on their invested capital are low or even negative. Firms making this choice likely face high exit barriers, which include economic, strategic, and emotional factors causing them to remain in an industry when the profitability of doing so is questionable. So here are the common exit barriers that firms face include the following. Specialized assets. Assets with values linked to a particular business. Fixed cost of exit, such as labor agreements. Strategic interrelationships. Relationships of mutual dependence, such as those between one business and other parts of a company's operations, including shared facilities and access to financial markets. Emotional barriers, aversion to economically justified business decisions because of fear for one's own career, loyalty to employees, etc. And lastly, government and social restrictions, often based on government concerns for job losses and regional economic effects, more common outside the United States. Now we'll discuss about the interpreting industry analysis. Effective industry analysis are products of careful study and interpretation of data and information from multiple sources. A wealth of industry-specific data is available for firms to analyze for the purpose of better understanding an industry's competitive realities. Analysis of the 5 forces within a given industry allows the firm to determine the industry's attractiveness in terms of the potential to earn average or above average returns. In general, the stronger the competitive forces, the lower the potential for firms to generate profits by implementing their strategies. An attractive industry has low barriers, suppliers and buyers with strong bargaining positions, strong competitive threats from product substitutes, and intense rivalry among competitors. These industry characteristics make it difficult for firms to achieve strategic competitiveness and earn above average returns. Alternatively, an attractive industry has high entry barriers, suppliers and buyers with little bargaining power, few competitive threats from product substitutes, and relatively moderately rivalry. Strategic group is a set of firms emphasizing similar strategic dimensions and using a similar strategy. The competition between firms within a strategic group is greater than the competition between a member of a strategic group and companies outside that strategic group. Therefore, intra-strategic group competition is more intense than is inter-strategic group competition. In fact, more heterogeneity is evident in the performance of firms within strategic groups than across the groups. The performance leaders within groups are able to follow strategies similar to those of other firms in the group and yet maintain strategic distinctiveness as a foundation for earning above average returns. The extent of technological leadership, product quality, pricing policies, distribution channels, and customer service are examples of strategic dimensions that firms in a strategic group may treat similarly. Thus, membership in a particular strategic group defines the essential characteristics of the firm's strategy. Strategic groups have several implications. First, because firms within a group offer similar products to the same customers, the competitive rivalry among them can be intense. The more intense the rivalry, the greater the threat to each firm's profitability. Second, the strengths of the five forces differ across strategic groups. Third, the closer the strategic groups are in terms of their strategies, the greater is the likelihood of rivalry between the groups. The competitor environment is the final part of the external environment requiring study. Competitor analysis focuses on each company against which a firm competes directly. Competitor intelligence is a set of data and information the firm gathers to better understand and anticipate competitors' objectives, strategies, assumptions, and capabilities. The Coca-Cola Company and PepsiCo, Home Depot and Lowe's, Carrefour SA and Tesco PLC, and Amazon and Google are examples of competitors that are keenly interested in understanding each other's objectives, strategies, assumptions, and capabilities. Indeed, this intense rivalry creates a strong need to understand competitors. In a competitor analysis, the firm seeks to understand the following: what drives competitors, which shown by its future objectives; what the competitor is doing and can do, which revealed by its current strategy; what the competitor believes about the industry, that's shown in organization's assumptions; and last, what the competitor's capabilities are, that is shown on the organization's strengths and weaknesses. Knowledge about these four dimensions helps the firm prepare an anticipated response profile for each competitor. The results of an effective competitor analysis help a firm understand, interpret, and predict its competitors' actions and responses. Understanding competitors' actions and responses clearly contributes to the firm's ability to compete successfully within the industry. Interestingly, research suggests that executives often fail to analyze competitors' possible reactions to competitive actions their firm takes, placing their firm at a potential competitive disadvantage as a result. Critical to an effective competitor analysis is gathering data and information that can help the firm understand its competitors' intentions and the strategic implications resulting from them. Useful data and information combine to form competitor intelligence, which is the set of data and information the firm gathers to better understand and anticipate competitors' objectives, strategies, assumptions, and capabilities. In competitor analysis, the firm gathers intelligence not only about its competitors but also regarding public policies in countries around the world. Such intelligence facilitates an understanding of the strategic posture of foreign competitors. Through effective competitive and public policy intelligence, the firm gains the insights needed to make effective strategic decisions regarding how to compete against rivals. When gathering competitive intelligence, firms must also pay attention to the complementors of its products and strategies. So complementors are the networks of companies that sell complementary products or services or are compatible with the focal firm's own products or service. Complementors expands the set of competitors that firms must evaluate when completing a competitor analysis. So, the differences between complementor and competitor. Complementor, if a complementor's products or service adds value to the sale of the focal firm's product, it is likely to create value for the focal firm. If a complementor's products or service is in a market into which the focal firm intends to expand, the complementor can represent a formidable competitor. For the last topic, ethical considerations. Firms must follow relevant laws and regulations as well as carefully articulated ethical guidelines when gathering competitor intelligence. Industry associates often develop lists of these practices that firm can adopt. Practices considered both legal and ethical include obtaining publicly available information, e.g. court records, competitors, help-wanted advertisements, annual reports, financial reports of publicly held corporations, and uniform commercial code filings. And attending trade affairs and shows to obtain competitors' brochures, view their exhibits, and listen to discussions about their products. In contrast, certain practices, including blackmail, trespassing, eavesdropping, and stealing drawings, samples, or documents, are widely viewed as unethical and often are illegal as well. Some competitive intelligence practices may be legal, but a firm must decide whether they are also ethical, given the image it desires as a corporate citizen. Especially with electronic transmissions, the line between legal and ethical practices can be difficult to determine. So that would be all, guys. Thank you for listening.